Okay. All right, so we are recording now. I'll welcome everyone again. My name is Joni Claypool, Director of Constituent Engagement here at Linfield University, class of 2006. So excited to see everybody here. This should be a really nice presentation and discussion. We have the privilege tonight of hearing from Sean Hoar, class of 80. He is our Distinguished Alumni of the Year per our Alumni Leadership Council. A little introduction about Sean. He is a partner and chair of the Data Privacy and Security Practice at Lewis, Brisboe, Bisgard and Smith LLP. This award honors someone, this Distinguished Alumni Award honors somebody whose professional or civic achievements mark them as the top leader in their chosen field. And Sean certainly, that does describe him, as he teaches all over the world, I'm guessing, and military, and has all sorts of expertise. Sean is an expert in cyber law. He leads a team that manages more than 2,000 data breaches each year and was named Cyber Law Firm of the Year in 2019 and 2020 by Advisen. Before joining Lewis Brisboe, Hoar served as the lead cyber attorney for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oregon. And he frequently books speaking engagements, has taught courses at Lewis and Clark, has authored 14 articles, and I'm sure more. Your list of articles that you've published is just, it's extensive. But it includes American Bar Association.
Ellen, this is where we have to mute Joni and just say, don't, that's all good.
Okay, I appreciate that, Sean. Sean has a very lengthy resume, lengthy CV. He has a lot of knowledge and information, and I'm really excited to hear you talk. So with that, Sean, I'm going to hand it over to you. Oh, then let's do introductions really quick since we have a small group, and then I'll hand it over to you. So let's start with Dr. Jennifer Madden. How about, will you introduce yourself? Oh, I can't hear you.
Everybody has that problem.
Is this any better? Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Sean, super excited about your presentation. I'm Jennifer Madden, Dean for the School of Business.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Great. And Joe, do you want to go next?
He's cooking dinner right now.
Okay, we'll get you later. Glenn and Marty, do you want to say hello?
There we go. One more. Okay, now we're unmuted. I'm Glenn Goon, class of 71, business degree, and currently serve on the Alumni Leadership Council.
I'm Marty Cox, class of 72, business and economics degree, trustee for Linfield College, and I work for a steel foundry.
Wow, wonderful.
Debbie.
Hi, Debbie Harmon Ferry, class of 1990. And I currently work as special assistant to the president, but for some time worked in the area of alumni. And Sean was the chair of the Alumni Council when I was in that role. So I'm excited to see him in action.
I'm almost tearing up. It's good to hear that voice. Good to see you.
And
All right,
Joni, I'm ready. If
Please.
I didn't unmute before, and I promise I'm not making dinner right now. I'm Joe Wilforth. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Sean, I'm super excited to meet you. And in fact, I'm going to see you, I think, in person Friday. But really excited to see what you have to say tonight as well. So thanks for being a part of Homecoming Week, and thanks for doing what you're doing tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Craig. Maybe. Oh, Craig Heiss just joined us. Oh,
there we are.
Okay.
I didn't hear you the first time. Sorry, Joni.
Sorry.
Sean, Craig Heiss, nice to see you again. It's been a while.
Good to see you.
Class of 95. Like Debbie, I've had the privilege of working at Linfield for a number of years. So it's great to be able to recognize you for a tremendous career.
And last but not least, my colleague Ellen.
Now, is Shelley on the line too? Or
Yes, there's
Yes.
she go.
Oh, I'm sorry. My thing wasn't.
Oh. Okay. I'll try. I'm in my car. Let's see if I can do my picture. I don't know. Can you see me? Wait, try again. There we go.
Now we
Oh,
can.
there you go.
Okay. I can't see myself, so I have no idea. Do you see my whole face or?
You look lovely this evening.
I'm not driving though currently. I'm parked, but I'm just leaving a meeting and heading home. But I wanted to catch Sean because we were classmates in
Oh my
1980.
gosh.
And
Wow.
oh, my maiden name is Paxson. And I was the editor of the Lynn News, as it was called
Yes,
then,
you
while
were.
he was the student body president. And well, I could tell all kinds of stories, but I won't. But I'm in San Diego and I work at University of California, San Diego Health System as a digital communications editor. And we've gone through a few big cybersecurity breaches recently. So this is of interest to me.
Wow. Well, very great to see you, Shelley. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I had no idea this is what you were doing. So I knew you were working in law, but so anyway, this will be fun.
Trying to stay behind the scenes, being stealthy behind those Russians, you know. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
But no, Shelley, yeah, Shelley and I, we do have, there was a, like, it's almost, this was like yesterday, Shelley. It's crazy. And I remember, and that little trip with Frank Nelson, you may recall.
Yes.
What a wonderful time. Thank you.
I
Wow.
was just talking with somebody who just came back from England. And so I was thinking I had this visual of, yeah, London hanging around, walking in January when it was all cold, and it was an amazing time.
Very cool. Very cool.
Let's see, we have
All right.
two
Well,
more.
shall I, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I think we have two more. David and then Ellen. David, are you good to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is David Chicks, class of 91. I know Debbie from back when we were both undergrad, both at Linfield. I actually work in software. I live up in the Seattle area now, but I go down to Linfield for all the home football games. So
Excellent.
Thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm the Alumni Engagement Officer at Linfield and pretty new, but excited to be here. So excited to hear what you have to say.
With that, I think we're ready to, just to listen, Sean. And it sounds like there are times with this nice small group that this could be a little bit of a conversation as well. So feel free to use the comments and I'll pick those up and pose those to Sean when they come in. So Sean, excited to hear you speak.
Sure. Sure. I would just say if we got a small group, just keep it conversational. And I appreciate it's always good, I guess, to mute until you want to speak. But if you want to speak, just raise your hand verbally and say, hey, Sean, shush, I got a question, and we'll keep it conversational. And that's funny how, I get pretty task oriented from day to day, and we're just so busy with what the malicious actor's doing. But hearing your voices and seeing Shelley, it's kind of get a little emotional here. That's kind of crazy. It's all good stuff, though. So I thought what I'd do is we tell you what we're going to talk about tonight, and then I'll walk through kind of my journey of the last. I can't believe it has been that long. I don't even want to say how long it might have been, but Shelley and I believe we were the class of 1980, which is just crazy to think of everything that's all the water, the great water that's been under the number of bridges since then. It's just been a couple of years, but this is what I want to talk about tonight. Basically, real briefly where I've been since that time, and then we're going to get right into what I see every single day the most dangerous threats facing businesses today, and then talk a bit about mitigating risk and the dark web, that sort of thing. Quite frankly, I'm not going to get into the stuff like I would if it was a huge webinar. I'd rather just keep it conversational. So if you guys have questions about stuff, there is no silly question. I'd love to respond to whatever. For better or for worse, I've kind of seen it all in the dark web. We, as I'll explain, we are handling 50 plus data breaches a week. Everything from stolen laptops, but typically it's large, complex ransomware attacks on large corporations, and we deploy all the forensics. But we unfortunately see what the malicious actors are doing every single day to destroy businesses in order to hold their ransom. So I've got a few stories to tell, but hopefully I can answer any questions you might have. So right after the first year after Linfield, just real briefly, I happen to be involved in student government with Shelley, as she mentioned, and I got very close to their dean of students at Linfield at the time, and he recommended I go into that then was called, I think, student personal administration or higher education administration. And he and one of his roommates, when he was getting his doctorate, recommended that I go to either Florida State or Indiana University, and ultimately chose Florida State. So I went there and had an accelerated master's for a year, and then took that and got a great job as an assistant director of residential and judicial affairs for 3 years at Vanderbilt University. And it was Vanderbilt's a residential campus, much like Linfield. In fact, it reminded me in terms of its structure at the time, much like Linfield, yet it was a completely different context. Vanderbilt University, quite frankly, was built by and for the Southern aristocracy, if you will, and let's say it didn't integrate until the early 60s. And when I was there, I worked with a chaplain, and they were commissioned a study about the integration of Vanderbilt University. And it was kind of interesting to me that in the 20 years after it had been integrated, it had the same number of undergraduate students that were Black and white. It really hadn't changed much. But so we worked with, that was when I look back at what I did. It's a lot of crisis management, responding to a variety of student situations where students needed either medical or psychological assistance, or I got to sit in the disciplinary chair from time to time as well. But it's largely, deploying student programs and other things. But it was when I think back at, and these are thoughts that are just quite frankly coming to me now. One of my dear friends was somebody who walked in marches with Martin Luther King, and he and I worked on the study together. It was that sort of thing that really made that a real substantive experience for me. And at some point, I realized that I was going to pursue what I wanted to in a career-wise. I either had to get a PhD or a Juris Doctorate, a JD. And if I was taking some doctoral courses at Vanderbilt, but I realized that if I did that, I was going to be locked into a relatively narrow area in my career. Whereas if I got a law degree, I could open my interests up, if you will, if opportunities came my way. So I decided to go back to University of Oregon. And when I was at Linfield, I played baseball, and we actually played a non-conference game against the Ducks. And I remember going to Eugene, having really never been there before, and this glorious spring day, much like it is in McMinnville, but just translucent blue skies and green foliage all around it. What was then Howe Field, playing baseball against the Ducks. I just love that place. I think I want to go to law school there. So went back to Oregon or University of Oregon, and ultimately got my law degree there. And while I was there, I did a number of clerking. I clerked for a couple firms, but ultimately had an opportunity to clerk for the U.S. Attorney's Office. And at the time, you may recall, Shelley, way back when, on Friday nights around that time, Miami Vice was a big episodic TV show, right? So every Friday night, my brain break was to watch Miami Vice. Well, as a law student, I actually handled motion practice for this large methamphetamine manufacturing case in Oregon, where these white guys, quite frankly, out in rural Oregon, were manufacturing this huge amounts of methamphetamine. And when I would do the motion practice, and then work behind the scenes, sometimes investigatively, as I got used to what the detectives were doing, and we had pictures from search warrants would be hundreds of thousands of dollars steeped up on beds with Mac 10s that we would seize, just crazy stuff. And I thought it was just like what you saw in Miami Vice, but here in Oregon of all places. I couldn't believe it. But when I clerked there, I found that I had experienced other areas of law, but just had no interest in pursuing them. But prosecution was something I really hadn't heard much about. Fortunately, I hadn't gotten into too much trouble up to that point in my life. But it was something it seemed very consistent with my value system, and I really just kind of fell in love with it. And right out of law school, I was hired on by the Lane County DA's office, and right out of law school, I was asked to supervise the district court division, and it was a whole nother life experience walking in to supervise attorneys who had been there a few years, wondering who this kid is. It's just out of law school, doesn't know anything about anything. But it's an opportunity to learn and grow and make friends very, very quickly, and then do my best to elicit their opinions about how things should be, as opposed to jumping in and steering things without facts behind it. So all these life lessons were tremendous opportunities to grow, and I was very fortunate to have an opportunity early on to be involved in some pretty big cases. And so at some point, about 4 years later, the U.S. Attorney's Office pulled me out and asked me to join the Eugene office, and I did. And immediately I was embedded in the DEA, doing some pretty high-level drug investigations. And my first year, I had what some would call a career case, where I was actually prosecuting a Thai general for his role in a heroin conspiracy out of Bangkok, and actually had to go over to Southeast Asia to investigate some things because, well, I shouldn't go into the details, but sometimes we have a 3-letter regulator agency in the government that does certain things to collect intelligence, and sometimes it's antithetical to the missions of those who I'm working with, and had to go ferret some things out there. And just it was a fascinating case and an opportunity for me once again to learn much more about how our government and governments work, and all the facets of the criminal justice system internationally. And that was that was back in 1991 and 1992 of all things. At some point, I got involved later in the 1990s after just being wired for sound with the DEA. I at some point saw what was happening with white collar crime and perceived that it was going to hit the internet soon. And so I got permission to form some task forces with the FBI, some local law enforcement agencies, and also worked with, at that time, some pretty nascent certifications with forensic evidence. And we didn't have forensics labs at the time. We didn't have a lot of forensic investigators at the time because it was a rather nascent industry. So I actually worked with the FDA to put some of those programs together. And then at some point, we started seeing things come in terms of online crime in the late 90s, 97, 98. And at that point, I handled some of the first large identity theft cases regionally and nationally. And I was asked to join a national cyber program. It had a number of iterations over the years in terms of its naming, but basically I was an organ representative to DOJ to manage online crime that was happening over here. And I just had some, again, I was very fortunate for about 15 years. I worked a variety of matters, but it was largely system intrusions with the FBI and Secret Service, where we were responding to, sometimes it was public sector entities, but oftentimes it was a private corporation that had been hit. And oftentimes I would go there with the FBI liaison. And one of the ways the FBI has worked over the years is they would actually form relationships with large corporations. So if the corporation had an issue, they knew they would call, Agent X, and I would go with the Agent X or Joe Smith out to wherever that corporation might be. And, I did a lot of that in those 15 years. And as a result of that, I was asked to train federal prosecutors and federal agents about how to investigate complex white collar and high tech cases. And because of that work, the State Department, with DOJ's consent at some point, asked me to train foreign investigators in an anti-terrorism context about how to trace digital evidence to terrorist activities. So I spent a little bit of time over in Southeast Asia and the Middle East doing that before moving to the private sector. And at some point, I was asked to join Davis Ray Tremaine. Kind of pulled me out of government and built an information security practice there. And then I was lured over to Louis Brisbois to build more of a national practice. And I have to tell you, it's been like a kid in a candy store. I'm one of these people. I just feel so fortunate and grateful. I love what I do, and I had the opportunity to really just build my dream law practice. They said, basically, Sean, tell us what you need, and you'll get it. So I mapped out really my business model of proactive services and reactive services, and identified how I wanted to geographically locate my team and the services we would provide and the relationships we would provide for client referrals. And 4.5 years later, we've gone from one person in a law practice over 60 personnel and 8 figures in revenue. And it's just and it's not about, it's for me, if you know me, I worked in the public sector. I love just putting things together and creating. And I quite frankly didn't pay a lot of attention to my financials along the way. I just knew things were working well. And at some point for me, I realized I needed somebody else to manage that stuff, because I was just going to continue to build, continue to expand. And as the number of data breaches we were managing, data breaches increased, I would hire more staff. And at some point when I started to look at those financials, I realized why the firm was happy to have me on board, because there is a lot of business in this area. And it's a very, very competitive industry now. But fortunately, I've just been wonderful to have a great team that we put together. So here I am. I do what I love to do. I've got right now over 60 personnel, over 45 attorneys. I actually just hired 7 new associates in the last 45 days, and I've got another 10 people in the queue just because we're so busy. But we manage a baseline of about 50 data breaches a week. So it's just an indication of how busy the malicious actors are, and how persistent they are with regard to accessing systems to monetize data. But our client base is literally every type of business, all verticals. We do work in the higher education sector, so be careful out there. We have, for better or for worse, a lot of college and universities who are our clients. A number of Fortune 500 companies, a lot of publicly held companies, and a lot of companies in actually the critical infrastructure. You've read in the headlines, Colonial Pipeline, and we do our best to keep our clients out of the headlines, but we also have worked with a number of, I'll just say, clients in that sector, as well as a couple others. Anyway, but this is kind of what I do on a daily basis, and I'm just very fortunate to work with a tremendous, group of people. the team I put together, and just to the extent you want to know, okay, who does this kind of stuff? Ultimately, it started out as me, and I had a boot camp my first month with Louis Brisbois, and I planned 12 hours of training on a weekend in January of 2017, and try to have people self-identify those that might have an interest in data privacy and data security that I could teach. And so I had this boot camp, and 20 people showed up in this conference room in LA. Another 20 people remoted in, and out of that, kind of started to form organically the base of my team that I ultimately trained over the next 8 to 12 months, and then this business started to grow. Along the way, at some point, you reach a limit within a certain universe of people in terms of skill sets. You've got to go outside that universe. And so I reached out to a dear friend of mine that I had worked with at DOJ for many years, and he was an executive he served executive positions with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia. And actually, he was doing what I did, but in Philadelphia. And at some point, because of what he did, he was nominated a Special Security Event Crisis Management Coordinator. What all that meant was that when the Pope came to America, he was actually the guy who worked with the FBI and Secret Service to develop the ops plan. And if somebody did something stupid, he was the guy that made the decision about whether the guy gets arrested. And so in the Democratic National Convention, the Republican National Convention, he was that guy that, again, worked with federal law enforcement to develop the ops plan. And he's on my team now. Just a wonderful guy. And what I've tried to do is I recognize that as a former ditch digger and a logger, a guy with 5 concussions in my little athletic career, that there are a lot of folks, I may have some intellectual deficits along the way, so I just do my best to hire really smart people and good people, good values, and I know any day of the week I can call anybody on my team, and they're probably going to help me find a solution if I can't, because they're all very smart. It's good. And I also, quite frankly, and this may come from being, growing up in rural Oregon, going to a wonderful school, Linfield College. I know it's now University College at the time, with really good people like Shelley, tremendous people, tremendous intentions, tremendous values. And so I think our practice group actually has differentiated itself in the industry, because I've got a certain culture I've created about communication, and it's respectful and compassionate and empathic. We deal with executives in crisis every day, and I never know what I'm going to get when I hop on a phone call. It may be somebody who is very let me say, stoic and receptive to everything I say, or it could be somebody who's just anxious, upset, defensive. Who knows what I'm going to get? And I've been on the phone with men that were my age who were in tears because somebody had just taken the wrench to their accounting firm, perhaps, that they had spent 30 years developing, and they had 300 families that they were responsible for, and they thought their livelihood had just gone out the back door because some malicious hacker had just taken their data. And in that situation, I cease being a lawyer, if you will, but you listen, and you get a feel for where they are, and you go where they are to find a solution. And at some point, I want them to be reassured that we know what we're doing, we got their back, we understand where they are, and we're going to take care of their people. We map out a plan, and we get there. But that's what I do every day, is stepping into a crisis. Generally, I'll know from an information security perspective what we're dealing with, but I never know what type of personnel, what type of attitudes, the pressure, the stress, et cetera. But what we do is we listen, and we go where they are, and then help take them to the other side of the incident. And I just find that fascinating on a daily basis. I have no idea whether that has anything to do with my little psychology major at Linfield, but I do like to study people as I listen to them 2,500 miles away, and get a feel for how we can help. On my team, I've got some just tremendous. Well, they're all kids from where I stand in life. But one of my newer partners is a kid with great litigation experience, and I say litigation experience from a liability perspective. Everybody on my team is an attorney that has had some litigation experience, and so they know what liability can occur if people don't do the right things. And so in a data breach response, we want to make sure we're responding rapidly. If we've got consumer data at risk, we want to take care of that data to protect the consumers, so you're substantially reducing liability, but otherwise protecting consumers and protecting employees. And so I've got one of my newer partners is a master's in cybersecurity engineering, as well as his law degree. Another senior associate, she's got a master's degree in digital forensics, as well as substantial litigation and clerking experience in the federal judiciary. Another new senior associate, she spent some time working with NSA and a couple other agencies, and Air Force OSI. And what that means is that she's got a tremendous understanding of national security law as well as information security. And she actually came to us from Russia at a very early age. So she speaks a couple languages. And I've got a number of associates that taught me a lot, and that they're not just multilingual. They speak usually a minimum of 4 or 5 languages, and including 4 or 5 Russian speakers. And so it's fascinating for me to see the next generation or so, and where they're going to take us because of the tremendous skills they've gathered along the way. But we, as part of my team, I want to make sure that our clients know that we take privacy serious. And so most of my teammates, we pay for training with regard to their privacy credentials or information security credentials, so that our clients, we can announce our skill sets at the outset, if you will. So that's kind of what I do. That's who I hang with on a daily basis. I'm not going to go through and sell you anything, but these are the variety of things we do. Initially, when I set up the business model, it was going to be 50% proactive work, where we're helping companies develop privacy policies or information security policies, or doing instant response planning, and then 50% would be instant response. What I found was that the world needed a lot of instant response. I guess that was responders, if you will. So it turns out I was probably doing 90% instant response and 10% proactive work. But we have these other services. Now we're building, as I build out the team, where we have more clients that want more proactive work, which is excellent, because that means they're preparing for, we're trying to prevent incidents. And then when incidents do happen, they have a much more fluid response because of the preparation for it. So this is what we do. We have teams in a couple different areas with regard to these different services. And what I try to do with my team is identify exactly what they want to do, and then make sure they get the training to do it. And then we manage, their, if you will, the fulfillment with their caseload, the type of cases, the amount of cases they have. And then as they grow on the team, should they want to write, we've got plenty of opportunities for them to do so. Should they want to speak, we've got plenty of opportunities for that. And so what we see is, young attorneys who really do have a passion for data privacy and information security can grow as much as they want within the context here. And every single day they're going to see what really looks like if companies don't have things in hand, and also just how malicious some of these people out there may be. So any questions at this point, now that I've put a couple people kind of to sleep almost? Okay. All right, well, no questions. So I'm going to step right into what we see every day, which I think are the most dangerous attacks on businesses. And it all has to do with ransomware or extortionate offenses. The bad guys have become, they're very sophisticated. They are steps, if not miles ahead of oftentimes what we do in the public domain. I know David is very familiar with software development, and he probably sees deficiencies on a daily basis, maybe his peer corporations, what they do. But the malicious actors have customized malware. If they're actually targeting certain companies or certain sectors, they will do substantial reconnaissance to get a feel for the information systems of the business, the nature of the software they may be using, and at some point they will be able to access their perimeter in complete stealth. And oftentimes, because of the customized malware, they will blow right past the state-of-the-art antivirus products. And then once they get inside the network, they do what we call live off the land. I mean, they live within that system, utilizing legitimate applications, but use them for malicious purposes. And so sometimes they'll be there for days or weeks using applications that were integrated into operating systems, but so they don't flag AV products because it's not malicious software, it's not malware, it's not malicious code. It's actually a legitimate system that's supposed to be in that operating system, but the malicious actors have figured out how to use it for malicious purposes. And that's, some people will scratch their heads and say, why are the bad guys? How could they be in networks for so long? Well, the bad guys have figured out how to fly beneath the radar. They're very sophisticated, very patient, and they've utilized also, products that are oftentimes used for vulnerability assessments, and they'll use them for malicious purposes to find those vulnerabilities and then access the vulnerabilities. Once the bad guys actually access networks, then they will start to harvest credentials from different areas within the system. Whether there are systems within networks like Active Directory, it contains usually user credentials. It helps to authenticate users when they come into a system. It's something that you as a user will never know it exists, but the malicious actors do, and they will access that and basically compromise it. Or domain controllers, which will do the same thing, basically providing access to different parts of the network, and they will come in and compromise that and obtain the credentials and then ultimately be able to map out the network. The bad guys will be in there for a while, map out the topography of the network, at some point identify the core applications, and at some point now, which is really I think the most dangerous part of the ransomware attacks, is they will find this sensitive data and start to exfiltrate it. What that means is they'll actually move it out of the network to their own repository. Oftentimes businesses have no idea this is happening until the bad guys launch that encryption attack, which then locks down the business model. But what you'll see in the next couple next slides is that the bad guys are continuing to evolve their business models, and these are truly criminal business models. And just as an indication, some recent months I was working with a very large financial services firm, and they had a pretty robust information security program, and they had what we call air-gapped backups, meaning that they followed the best advice, following the best practices, and part of the backup system was actually completely separate from the network, so bad guys couldn't access it. And so they got hit with a ransomware attack that locked them down, but immediately they were able to start to restore from that gapped backup because their data, that was completely separate from the network was all intact, and they ultimately got up and running within 48 hours. And this is a large financial services firm, kind of a heroic effort, if you will. Well, they didn't even commence communication with the attacker. And what typically happens in a ransomware attack is you get encrypted, and as you go try to log on, you're going to get a ransom note that says, by the way, you're encrypted, hello, but we're here to help you. All you have to do is pay $2 million or whatever it might be. And there are some companies that will immediately engage with this, that's what we call the threat actor or malicious attacker, to get a feel for what they need to do next. Some will stop and maybe call professionals, and we'll then hire a ransom negotiator who will then actually, as a third party, negotiate. And some will just say, we don't have to talk with them because we got good backups. Well, what the company didn't realize is the bad guys had stolen literally every sensitive consumer data set that these guys had, which is tens of thousands of consumers. But 4 weeks go by, they're up and running. It doesn't look like anything's going on, and they get a call from it sounds like a Russian reporter. Somebody calls and says they're a reporter with some network that they hadn't heard about, but with a Russian accent, says, we'd like to talk to you about that hack you had 4 weeks ago. And of course, people were like freaked out because nobody outside the network knew, or outside the business knew, that they had been hacked. Well, what it was that gang that actually hacked them were coming back to collect the ransom that was left on the table. And once they figured out who this was, they said, we don't know what you're talking about. And they said, well, yes, you do. I'm going to send some of the data that we stole from you, and show that all of a sudden they see the consumer data sets that have come back to them from this malicious attacker and realized, oh my gosh, they stole all that sensitive data in our network. They have literally all tens of thousands of consumer data sets. But that was the accounts receivable unit for this Russian gang. And you think, what? Well, that's exactly what it was. They have their research and development team, and at some point they deploy their tools, if you will. They hack, they steal, and then they at some point assume that you're going to pay ransom because you know that either you need a decryptor to decrypt a sensitive data, that mission critical data, or that perhaps they've stolen data and you're going to have to pay for that. Well, it turns out the bad guys didn't want to leave that ransom on the table. They wanted to make sure this company knew that they had all this consumer data, so the company ended up paying a sizable ransom in order to prevent disclosure of it. And it sounds crazy, but quite frankly, in this industry, there's some honor among thieves, and that they know that if in fact they do disclose that data after ransom's paid, then it's going to get out within the industry that don't pay these guys because they're just going to violate the agreement anyway. Well, it turns out they will agree to not post. They will agree to show you they'll give you proof of deletion, and it may be a deletion log or a video where they're deleting it, or they will allow you to actually download the data and delete it. So ostensibly, of course, they could have copied it because they're criminals, but it's more likely than not they're going to comply with the agreement. And what we find is that there are some of these gangs out there that we've handled many of their matters, and that we have not yet seen them post data once they agree not to post it. But unfortunately, they can extract quite a price out of corporations. So again, this is what we see on a daily basis. And the trouble is with ransomware, the malicious actors are constantly evolving, and they will have a new actor that comes out, and we have a couple brand new variants that we deal with, and our team is big enough with our footprint that we have there are 2 or 3 firms that have the type of footprint we do. We're probably the second largest footprint in the U.S. And because of that, we are seeing things today that nobody else has seen before. And so we oftentimes will consult with the FBI about new tactics we're seeing from the malicious actors, or new what we call ransom variants that no one else has seen yet. And we'll work with the FBI to identify basically the patterns of behavior that other people can expect. So when somebody else hits their system, other potential victims can actually show up vulnerabilities before it happens. But what the bad guys are now doing, some of them will come in and steal data, not encrypt, and so the company has no idea anything's happened. And then at some point, the bad guys will communicate and say, by the way, if you don't pay us, we're going to start posting and disclosing your data. And sometimes it's very, very sensitive data. We had a matter this last week where an entity within the healthcare sector had been hit. It was some of the most sensitive data that a healthcare entity can hold. And unfortunately, the bad guys threatened to post it. And they were relatively new, trying to establish their name in the industry, and they wouldn't negotiate either. It said, basically, we've identified this X price as what this is worth. And if you don't pay this by, they gave us 4 days, this stuff's getting dumped on the dark web, and we're going to tell everybody about it. And they do, and they will. We have another new variant we dealt with in recent weeks. Our team has handled 5 different matters with them, and if you don't pay ransom, they hit you with what's called a distributed denial of service attack, where they take data from tens of thousands of compromised machines around the world, and then point them basically at your site to try to knock you offline. And they plug your, if you will, digital pipes with so much data that you can't communicate inward or you can't communicate outward. Really knocks your business offline. And so we're now working with victims if they choose not to pay ransom, because that's our last resort. We don't want to pay ransom if we can avoid it. But if a company's got mission critical data that's really, it's absolutely necessary for the business model to function, and it could be in the healthcare sector, it could be in critical infrastructure where you've got to have that data back. Sometimes you're going to have to pay for a decryption key, or in other situations where data is so sensitive that you've got to do everything you can to prevent it from being posted. But the bad guys know that, and they will use it against them. And they're getting ever more aggressive with launching, physical volumetric attacks against businesses that take them offline. So it's scary out there. It's scary out there. Any questions at this point? So what the bad guys will do, they'll look for high value targets. For instance, probably 2+ years ago, we started to see them attack what we call managed service providers. So your third party providers that provide you, maybe it's data hosting, maybe storage in the cloud environment, it may be your technology providers. The bad guys realized if we can start hitting them, and they've got 100 or 1,000 downstream clients, we don't have to hit those corporation by corporation by corporation. We can hit the managed service provider and extract a ransom from them. And if they don't pay, then we're going to hit all their downstream clients and at the same time and embarrass them, basically knock them out of business. And so we started, sometimes we'd be asked to represent a managed service provider and deal with that. Sometimes we were asked to represent multiple downstream providers. We had one weekend where we had, I think, 7 ransomware attacks in the manufacturing sector. And we were asked to represent everybody downstream from an MSP that had been taken offline. And these were large manufacturers whose business operations has just been shut down because the bad guys locked them out. And so the bad guys are really trying to leverage that. And those businesses know that some of them, if they've got contracts, for instance, with certain providers in certain industries, they might be losing, believe it or not, they might be losing up to $1 million in revenue a day, or be fined under contract up to $1 million a day, which is absolutely crazy. It just sounds crazy, crazy numbers, but that's how serious it is. And if they're shut down for a day, it's really going to start to aggregate the pain, and then sometimes that will cause them to have to pay ransom. Bad guys will. Oh yes.
Debbie had a question.
I do, Sean. You used the phrase dark web, which was also in the title here. Can you tell us what you mean, like when you use that term? What is the dark web?
I'm so glad you asked that. Let's see if there's something about the dark. Oh, look at that. The dark web. The dark web it's not necessarily a certain location on the internet. You can't set your dial and say, I'm going to go there. But there's a lot of different digital devices, servers that may be data repositories that have corrupted what we call the domain name convention. So you, Debbie, can't find them unless they invite you in, right? And it's a way to keep the good guys out. And so if you're a malicious actor, you can identify where they are at some places in that dark web communication, and then when they will give you credentials for a fee, and you can use their server to park your, this is pretty, sounds pretty bad, child pornography, for instance. Maybe you've got a large repository and you've got to store it someplace where law enforcement's not going to find it. Or maybe you've got a rootkit which is going to help launch a ransomware attack, meaning it's got the basic code to deploy an exploit. Well, you're going to park it on that server because law enforcement can't get to it. And so on the dark web, you've got all the services that it may take to actually run an exploit against a corporation. There's some areas where it's just really an online forum for stolen data you can purchase, or malicious code. Or you can connect with people and let's say, I've got this corporation that runs partially on Windows, some on Linux, some on Macs. I need you to come up with some malicious code. And by the way, they're using FortiGate firewalls and some other Sonic wall, VPN devices or something like, all the various devices. They'll describe it to them and say, I want you to create some malicious code that allows me to do some reconnaissance and get in that system. And there are guys for a fee will create the malicious codes. The bad guys can utilize it. So all kinds of services, whatever they might be. What I find is probably the most dangerous service to us, the legitimate business owners, is that they also have antivirus checking services. So all the top-notch antivirus services that you may have in your computer or businesses have in their systems, the bad guys have access to them all. And they put together, I'll call it a library or a tunnel of AV services. And if they run their malicious code through those services and it comes out the other side undetected, they know that today they can hack into any corporation in the world and not be detected. And so those services are available for a fee on the dark web as well. And the bad guys have recognized that that's key to the success of a malicious coder, to make sure that it's going to be able to fly under the radar of all your conventional AV products. So everything that it takes to run an exploit you can buy on the dark web, which is basically the murky part of the web, but you can't necessarily identify unless you're kind of part of that group. But there's a lot of stuff out there, unfortunately. And the bad guys are also you could say this is categorized as part of the dark web, but even legitimate systems. And we've seen, unfortunately, in the higher education sector, legitimate servers used for what you do on a daily basis in business, where bad guys are using them to park their maybe credentials that have been stolen in data breaches, or data sets that have been stolen in data breaches, because maybe certain information systems aren't detecting that foreign data is there, and law enforcement has no reason to knock on your door to find it, right? And so we've had a couple of situations. We had one time where the bad guys were not quite as smart as they should have been, because they had a DDoS attack, distributed denial of service attack. They were launching from one school to another university, and the university was calling the IT director at the other school saying, why are you attacking us? And the IT director had no idea what this Ivy League school was talking about, and they ultimately tracked it back to a server where, in fact, the bad guys were using a server in a certain university to hack into another system. And it was, for me, my perspective was just stupid, because at some point somebody's going to figure it out pretty quickly and shut it down. But that stuff happens because, unfortunately, the door was open for the bad guys to utilize that. Anyway, does that start to answer your question, Debbie?
Yes, thank you. I didn't know if it was an actual place or it was just things that are bad all mean dark web. So that helps. Thank you.
I wish it would like a sign said "keep away, dark web," but just don't do anything untoward with your computer. Just make sure you follow your IT director's advice, that kind of stuff. So we do a lot with a lot of ransomware. The other big area where businesses are being affected on a daily basis is business email compromises, and the bad guys will pretty sophisticated what we call phishing attacks, and this is to differentiate what we used to experience 12, 20 years ago, where you get this ridiculous message that says, oh, by the way, your user credentials are outdated, or whatever they might be, whatever the term might be, at this bank that you never heard of or never used, and unless you put in your user credentials, we're going to suspend your account. It's like, well, I don't even know who you guys are, so obviously it's a phishing attack. Or, gee, I'm a distant cousin of yours, you've never heard of me before, but our other uncle just died over in this foreign country, and he's got 10 billion in assets. I just need your credentials to get, and then I will share 5% of the funds, but I need your bank account to dump the money in, kind of. And it sounds stupid, it's crazy, but people would actually send these phishing messages out, and 2 to 5% of people would click on them, ultimately share information, and the bad guys would walk away with money. It's just crazy. Well, now the bad guys we don't see a lot of that, but what we do see is bad guys who are accessing email accounts, compromising them, and then posing as the person who actually owns that account or uses that account to gather other information. For instance, while we used to see spoofed email addresses from somebody who would say they're a CFO contacting the HR director for all the W-2 images that they need for the corporate tax return, and the dutiful human resources director would say, here you go, Bill. Here's a master PDF of all the W-2 images, and by the way, the next email I'll send you the password. Well, that wasn't Bill, the CFO, it was a malicious actor spoofing his email address. Well, now that the malicious actors are actually compromising Bill's email account, and so the human resources director has no means to understand that it's not somebody outside their system, it's somebody actually within this system. And so you're sharing information like you might otherwise with a colleague. And so what we know is the bad guys are always looking for secondary access to funds through W2 image exploits, direct deposit redirects. If you've got employee portals where you can change your direct deposit information, well, the bad guys know that, and they're going to look for those credentials to compromise those portals. They're going to put their own bank account in there. And so come payroll, it's not going to go to the employee, it's going to go to the malicious actor. But where they're making millions of dollars is they will compromise somebody's account who appears to have the wire transfer authority, and they will get in their account. They'll actually watch for communication about wire transfers or invoices. They will change the instructions. And so rather than a wire transfer going to maybe somebody owes you money, maybe it's a donor, or maybe you're paying a vendor for construction on a new building. They're going to redirect the wire transfer to the vendor to their own bank account, and all of a sudden the vendor is going to come knocking on the door 2 weeks down the road, wondering why you haven't paid them, $75,000 or $125,000 for that project. And you're going to see, well, yeah, we did, and so that's not my account, but it's because either your account or their account was compromised. And bad guys are walking with millions of dollars on literally a daily basis that our team sees across the country. And so the bad guys are, anytime they can monetize the data, that's precisely what they're doing. So in our training, we obviously want our information technology personnel across the country to implement what we call, a good layered defense and follow best practices. But what we also know is that every human being and every network is a firewall, and I call it the human firewall. And so we want to make sure when we do training that everybody who actually logs on to a network understands that their computer could be a gateway to the network or a firewall to the network, and they really need to take very seriously any email that they receive that they don't recognize the user. It's okay to delete, not respond. If somebody really wants to get a hold of you, they can actually pick up that old thing called the telephone and call. But we really want to make sure we have a culture of communication where people don't believe they're going to be criticized if they say something, and believe it or not, some cultures are like that. We want them to have a kind of a culture of communication where if you see something, you can say something and actually be rewarded for it or thanked for it. One of the reasons we have a sense of urgency is not just because property gets damaged, information gets lost, but there's this regulatory environment out there, and in our economy, sometimes, quite frankly, the bureaus within the Attorney General's offices, their operations budgets are sometimes funded by assessments on businesses. So there are these statutes called data breach notification statutes, and anytime consumer data may be affected in certain jurisdictions, the business has an obligation to notify as soon as possible. So we help the business assess their notification obligations. We help them draft those letters and get them out the door. But then sometimes the entity, the Attorney General's office, will say, well, thank you very much for complying with the data breach notification statutes. And by the way, could you tell me? And one Attorney General's office, for instance, in Indiana they're very good about that. They've been doing this for years. They will follow up what is just a legitimate, timely business or data breach notification letter, and they'll follow up the letter saying, by the way, could you tell us, 6 months prior to this incident, could you tell us what your policies and training were to protect consumer information? And then the second area of inquiry will be, and by the way, can you give us more detail about this incident? And the third area of inquiry was, is always going to be, what kind of mitigation did you do afterward? What increased security have you put into your system? And what they're looking for is that all 50 states, in addition to these data breach notification statutes, have what they call unfair trade practices acts, and which means that if their business engages in either deceptive practices or unfair practices, they can be assessed by the Attorney General. And what they're looking for oftentimes is, even though a business, quite frankly, has done everything right, if there appears to be a deficiency and maybe they didn't spend enough money on information security, they're going to say, well, you engaged in an unfair trade practice because your peers would have spent more, or you didn't spend enough to secure the consumer information, so therefore you engaged in a deceptive trade practice by not securing consumer information as much. And they will they'll assess a business. Now, we interface with them all the time. We've been fortunate to develop good relationships with them across the country, but I'm sometimes surprised at how aggressive they can be to try to assess a business that is just a victim of a malicious criminal attack, because those assessments actually fund the operations budget for their employees. Anyway, so we've got to be very careful about the data breach notification statutes. And there are a variety of other regulations that we have to navigate every day. And the higher education sector, for instance, FERPA, we have served as outside counsel to a number of universities across the country, where we advise them when they have data security incidents about what to do. We help them with their incident response planning. We do tabletop exercises for them and that sort of thing, as we do in healthcare. Then you've got the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, Securities and Exchange Commission Act. It's again different entities that regulate different areas of the economy, and we deal with them on a regular basis as well. An OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Control. Anytime we make ransom payments, we have to make sure we have a due diligence and compliance program, so we're not paying a known terrorist. Oftentimes we know it's a criminal we're paying, but at least they're not sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Asset Control, so we're not violating any Treasury laws when that happens. But we have to pay attention to all these statutes on a daily basis as well, which makes our job pretty interesting. It's all good stuff. Keeps me awake. And with that, Joni, there are also costs. You guys, don't want to bore you with that, but this is another thing that we work with businesses to get them to understand the different types of costs that can be incurred if they don't increase resources to their information security program. And we explain as counsel, this is kind of what we do to help them out in an incident, and then we walk through preventative measures and help them develop various preventative programs to stave off the bad actors. And then here you go. Here's our resources. I want to be a trusted partner to our clients, to cyber insurance carriers and businesses. And so we actually publish a book. We update it every 6 months. It has summaries of all the data breach notification statutes and information security standards and some privacy compliance checklists, that kind of stuff. We also have a practice app. The millennials in my group said, Sean, you got to have these things. So you have these little digital tools, and then let's see, we've got I really wanted to show, quite frankly, we've got some, it's not me, but my teammates are smart. And I thought, well, we want to show their thought leadership. And so we have a blog called Digital Insights, where we blog about data privacy and information security stuff. And then we also have a quarterly newsletter. It's called, I know it's really creative, Digital Insights quarterly newsletter. There you have it. And I did actually come up with the Digital Insights name I want to let, so not completely deficient there. And then we also have quarterly cybersecurity webinars. And all those things are just free of charge. We do that for clients, for a law firm, for anybody else's clients that might want to come, because we just want to show them that we have experience that can add value to whatever they're doing. And to the extent that there are clients, we want to make sure they're getting that proactive information to protect themselves. But it's kind of fun. That's kind of who we are. There you have it. Oh, there you have it. There's me. Yay. Anyway, so any questions? I know it's talked fast. It's 6:52 p.m. I think by a clock I have that may be inaccurate, and I probably didn't set enough time for questions. But what do you say, Joni?
Yeah, I love it. Go ahead, raise your hand if you have a question. Debbie.
So, Sean, when you came through Linfield some decades ago, I can't imagine that this is what you thought you would be doing.
Decades ago.
A couple decades ago.
No, I started that was a long time ago. But anyway, it's all good. We feel young. It's not in the chronology. It's in the attitude, right?
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
Agreed.
But you probably didn't think about this as a career. So curious to know, like, what advice would you have for today's students who maybe the careers they're going to have, they haven't even thought of yet? What would you say are takeaways for you about what you would tell them in terms of looking at their future?
Now, you can always depend on Debbie for excellent questions. I love that. And this is one of the things I learned in law school was that I want to try out something that I think I might want to do before I'm forced to do it, if you will, or locked into it. And I, in law school, for instance, I was given a couple neat opportunities to do certain things in clerking situations, and it was by trying them out that I ultimately found my career choice. On the other hand, I had some law school classmates who didn't have to do that for whatever reason, but were absolutely convinced that they wanted to go in a certain area of law because maybe an uncle had done it or a father had done it, or they were going to take over a law firm, whatever it was, but they never experienced it as a law clerk, right, on a part-time basis. And after law school, they jumped to it on a full-time basis and said, oh my God, I hate this. And I had a couple of friends who actually left the law because they had never tried it out. So I would say use your college experience to start to identify those opportunities that you think might be something be interesting. try it out as on a part-time basis. Try it out as a part-time employee while you're going through college. Help pay tuition, and get a feel for whether you really like it. And then sometimes you're going to love the substance, you're going to love the employees, and it turns out to be a career choice. Sometimes it's just going to be a great experience. It's going to be something great you can put on your resume. You're going to say, I really like that. It was good experience, but I don't think I want to do that full time. And so I'd say really try that out. But I think also you will, at some point along the way, you'll start to develop strengths. And I think that's where mentors along the way can help students identify what their skill sets might be. And it's not as though that's going to drive a lifelong career choice, but it may help them at least identify an immediate job area where they can utilize those skill sets and then enhance those skill sets, and they'll lead to other opportunities. Did I answer the question okay?
Great. Jennifer, you had your hand up?
So Sean, thank you. Excellent presentation. And at Linfield, we launched a graduate program just in the fall in 2 tracks, and the core is all around, emotional intelligence and creativity and innovation. And one of the specific tracks is design and innovation. And one of the other potential future tracks that we've been thinking about is one in cyber strategy. So there's clearness for me in cybersecurity.
Can I come and help out?
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So
say
there's a
yes.
clearness in this cybersecurity, but we need more people. It seems like you feel like, to me, a cyber strategist, the person who can be responsible for the planning and that's needed, to identify weaknesses in the systems and protect organizational systems against malicious hacks and other kind of cyber threats, but someone who can communicate with like a client and the technologist. So the cyber strategist doesn't really have to know all of the technical components, but they know enough and they have like enough emotional intelligence to like interact with the, manager who, or I don't know, but I feel like we're onto something in the cyber strategy space.
I love how you described it. One of the reasons I actually ultimately developed a law practice after I left DOJ is that I would oftentimes respond with the FBI to a situation and find that there were very well-intentioned, well-credentialed information technology personnel who did everything right in terms of putting the network together, but they didn't know anything about information security, which was rather kind of a nascent industry in late 90s, early 2000s. And so I thought, gosh, if I could just put something together to teach them about that aspect of it in a proactive way, they could then at some point absorb that information, and as they're putting together the networks, they could also deploy the security controls that nobody's told them about yet, right?
Yes.
And in that matter, do things proactively. And so anyway, but that was all part of my initial business model, was to do everything I could, from security control assessments, instant response planning, tabletop exercises where we visualize the attacks before they happen, so you respond much more fluidly and find gaps in what you would perceive to be your instant response process. And then even things like this thing called the attorney-client privilege, where it can actually create an opportunity for you to communicate in confidence to protect it from those who would want to take advantage of the situation. So that's one of the reasons we are encouraged to be engaged at the outset in a data security incident, so we can cover all the communication that occurs during that with the attorney-client privilege, and then the reports that flow from that with the work product doctrine, because it is confidential to that corporation. And if we believe needs to be shared with law enforcement or someone else, we can do that. But we want to think, again, plan and strategize for that. But it's interesting when you mentioned strategy on a daily basis. If we're dealing with attackers who are demanding ransom payments, that's just one area that I strategize with. But we actually strategize. Okay, this is the actor based on what they did last week in another matter. We think that's what they might do now, and I will actually identify, based on the ransom demand, where we should start out with our, again, it's not a typical business negotiation because we're dealing with criminals,
Yes.
But we try to identify what the business impact is of what the value is of the information they're stolen, if we're trying to prevent disclosure of it, versus the value of it if it's a mission critical data that's locked up. And really, when I say the value of it, really how that impacts on a daily basis the business operations. And once we do that, then I'll establish a bid chart. So say it's a $2 million ransom. And we ultimately don't want to pay more than say 475, just hypothetically. So I'm going to start out at far less than 10%. I'm going to probably start up maybe 125, so I don't piss off the bad actors. It's like, get a 6-figure payout, come on. But then incrementally, I'll a certain mathematical percentage until we finally get up to where we hopefully can get them off the ledge, come down from 2 million. And at some point, the more rational ones will say, you know, 300,000 or 400,000 is not a bad payday for 4 days work.
Yes.
But it's really a matter of how we communicate with them. So I actually will script out the language, hand it off to a third party, have them communicate, and then we get what we call the comms package in their response, and then we strategize what to do next. But with information security, it's the same way. We're going to look at their operation systems. We know the vulnerabilities that generally exist within the enterprises. We will strategize with the client on a priority basis about, you know, the resources, you know, what we can do, where the low-hanging fruit is to plug it up, what the longer-term vulnerabilities are that we've got to shore up, decommission legacy systems, for instance, deploy multi-factor authentication, deploy heuristic-based endpoint detection and response tools, all the stuff that's just music to my ears, but work with them to get a feel for what works for them. Because historically what's happened is there are these security controls that may be too expensive, and the companies, small to medium market companies, didn't have the discretionary spend to implement those controls. The bad guys started to manipulate them. Well, what we now know is that oftentimes those tools now, because of industry competition, are far more accessible to businesses. It's just a matter of having somebody to show the business the way. You know, by the way, there's this product over here. Why don't you talk with so and so? We'll put a package together. And oftentimes, we have our relationships are such that we can oftentimes customize even pricing to a client based on where they are in the marketplace. But I just love that idea. That's fun, and that's honestly, there's so much that's taking place in the marketplace that cyber strategy is. There, you can take that so many different ways. It's really smart. Good job.
I'm going to ask permission to follow up with you to take a look at the curriculum I've outlined and see what you think.
I'd love to. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a kind of a comment on based both on what Debbie and Jennifer asked there. I served 8 years in the Navy before going to college. And then after getting out,
thank you.
I served with the Naval Security Group for 15 years in communication security. And everything you talked about tonight is nothing that I ever heard about in 15 years. So when you start looking at curriculums and what have you, people have to be, you know, be able to look, and I think hearing you speak, you did this. You have to be able to look at the future and say, this is where things are going. Because you know, I went to Germany in 1989, and Marty's heard this story a few times. We were sent there on business and we took portable computers. They weren't laptops in those days. We took portable computers. We could get a 20 meg hard drive or a 40 meg hard drive. We had to take 20 meg hard drive because in 1989, 40 meg was too high a technology to take out of the country.
And that was more. There was more memory than they used to land on the moon. That was massive technology at the time. Crazy. Well, I'm looking. I'm thinking. What was it? Was it a Commodore 64 monochrome screen, 3.5-inch screen that I actually banged out a couple of large articles on back in around that time period myself. I think I was a monochrome. I want to say it was a Commodore 64 perhaps, but it was like literally a 3 or 5-inch screen where I typed out a large article with 110 footnotes. It just drove me nuts because of the technology of the time, but that's what we had to work with, right? And then as I became an assistant DA, I used an Apple GS2, and because I was well, let's just say, well, I'm a little anal, a little what do I want to say, obsessive compulsive about a few things, and my trial prep was such that I actually wrote down every question I was going to ask in direct examination of a witness, and then would attach. And then if I knew what the response would be based on my knowledge of what had happened, the crime that had occurred, I would write down the response to make sure it was evidentially correct. And if I thought that the defense was going to object, I would identify what my response to their objection would be. And then if I had cross-examination of their witness, I would type it all out, but I used my Apple GS2 to prepare for every trial. And these other attorneys in the DA's office at the time were thinking, who is this guy? So they would come in and want to play golf, golf games on my computer. It's like, guys, it is not here to play games. I actually use it to work. But so I'm just I'm a little oddball in that respect. But let's just say I've been, computers have been my friend in part because I write very, very slowly. And quite frankly, I had a deficit. It's probably a learning disability where I found writing very, very difficult. When I took the bar exam, it was physically painful. 3 days of writing longhand where I just had difficult, my brain transmitting it to a written word. It was just slower, but I could type like crazy. And eighth grade, my typing teacher just gave me some sort of award because I typed so fast. So it turns out I became the computer guy at work because I could do stuff with the computer that others can't. But ask me to write something, I'm last to the line, if you will. And it's interesting how that just kind of came to me naturally. I mean, well, at some point I recognized that, but it was more of one of these deficit that I was able to turn into a strength. And that goes back to Debbie's question too, is that a lot of times we have these deficits that because of that, you do something to compensate for it, and the compensation for it will take you in a whole nother direction, which solves the problem. Anyway, I could go on and on, but there you have it.
All right, maybe one final question. It's about 7:05.
A quick question. So how often do you have to pay out? How often are you able to avoid paying by either to encrypt stuff, decrypt it yourself, or just technologically defeat the attack?
The challenge is that, quite frankly, the customized malware we're seeing, unless you've got a good heuristic-based endpoint detection and response tool, and what I'm referring to, and you'll recognize what I'm talking about, whether it's a Falcon Complete with CrowdStrike or Carbon Black or SentinelOne or Cortex XDR from Palo Alto, unless you've got one of their products, or products similar, but those are really, I think, the 4 best in the world right now. Unless you've got that deployed, the malware is going to fly right by the AV products, and it's really difficult to prevent unless you've got one of those tools already on your endpoints. But what you can do is make sure that you've got, you can minimize the attack. Like you can minimize phishing attacks, which are an attack vector with multi-factor authentication deployed, right? And so even if a guy harvests user credentials from another data breach, they can't necessarily access the account because they don't have that second means of authenticating themselves to a system. And so those are the two, even regardless of what else you have in your system. You could have the most robust information security system with all 256 controls that are suggested by special publication 853 from the NIST, right, from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. You got all that stuff in there, but if you don't have multi-factor authentication and a heuristic-based EDR tool, the bad guys are going to get in and they're going to take advantage of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm very familiar with MFA, multi-factor. It's like twice a day at least just to log on to systems. I do that, so.
Oh, good. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And with regard to your question about how often do we pay ransom, we do our best not to, but and it used to be 60+% of the time we would have to because the bad guys had locked up mission critical data or had stolen very sensitive data. Now it's substantially less than that. But it's probably, I don't have metrics immediately available to me, but it's probably still closer to 40-some% of companies that do have to do that. Oftentimes it's because of the revenue they're losing or because sensitive data they're concerned about posting and the liability that might flow from that. But we're trying to reduce that as much as we can within proactive information security, and then also really from a business impact point of view, helping them kind of socialize the fact that this data may be out there, and let's do everything we can if it's certain types of data like social security numbers. If that's in the bad guy's hands, they may have already been out there anyway, but through credit monitoring, we can get a detection immediately if somebody tries to utilize that. Other type of information like genetic information, biometric information, not so much there, and that's where I get really concerned when the bad guys threaten the post because that can really cause some serious harm to people. So, but there you have it. Any other questions, David?
Not right now, but thank you.
Oh, you bet. Thank you.
All right. Well, since there are no more questions at this point, Sean, thank you so much for your comments. I'm seeing a note from Joe really quick here. Glenn's comment underscored one of the great strengths of a liberal arts degree and overall arts preparation, flexibility, and intellectual curiosity that serves the students so well after graduation. He stole my line. Yes.
Well done, Glenn and
Well
Sean.
said.
Wow. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. I really do.
Oh
And
my
if Shelley's
gosh.
still there, if she hasn't fallen asleep, that's another the wonderful thing about a small college and the liberal arts education is, I haven't talked to Shelley for a long time, but it's like yesterday, and I'm just so pleased and I'm so fortunate to have had that opportunity to know her, and she has no idea how things that she did while we were friends impacted me later, causing me to behave in, and respond to certain situations in life in certain ways, because she was awesome, a tremendous leader, great discretionary judgment, great values. And when you have a friend like that, you learn from that and it affects you down the road. It's good stuff. So thanks, Shelley.
Well, and I have to say, Sean, the term emotional intelligence came up, and you are like 100% that. So don't be afraid of the writing part, because you've got the talking and the feeling and the communications all down pat.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, Joni, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for spending your time with us this evening. I really appreciate it. Don't forget, Linfield's Finest is Friday at 5:30 out at Evergreen. If you're able to come, we would love to see you there. And Sean will say a few more words. With that, I will end our meeting and just say thank you, and we'll see you soon.